This video is just going to give some tips and a general overview of the process for wiring the Dbot 3D printer and for doing the CoreXY belt routing. So there are a lot of little things in this wiring guide that if you aren't paying close attention you might miss, and I'm just going to go over them here in this video. First one, when you're creating the wiring harness for your hot end to come down to your electronics box, note how this X min end stop, the part cooling fan, and the hot end fan have their red and black wires joined together there to reduce the number of total wires coming off this hot end, reducing the weight and making things a bit more manageable. So just make note of that. There's quite a few things like that throughout the build here. I splice and shrink tube extensions to the stepper motors, going further than where I want to place my electronics box, just so I have some extra slack. You can see down this front left side of the frame there's going to be a lot of traffic. The LEDs, the hot end carriage, the extruder motor, that front CoreXY motor are all coming down this side. This spring here tensions this bearing up against the filament, which will be pushed through the Bowden tube into the hot end. So you're going to terminate a lot of your connections with these DuPont connectors. There's lots of videos on YouTube about it. I'm just going to really quickly cover kind of how it goes. Here's the crimp for one of them. There's actually two spots you crimp these DuPont connectors on, once around the wire and once around the barrel. You're going to cut off a smaller than you'd expect amount of wire to make these crimps, as you can see on some of the ends there I have. It's actually quite a small amount of wire that you need to crimp on. The second part of the crimp, the triangular part, actually goes around the jacket. So you're going to get all of these done, all of your extensions done to where you place your electronics box, connect them up with these DuPont connectors, and start testing everything out. So I am going to go over some Dbot wiring tips, but before I get into the details of the wiring diagram, just really quickly I'm going to go over what a ramps board is, what the ramps Arduino is, and the kind of kit that you'll need to order that you'll be plugging everything into once you've done these wiring harnesses. So these kits come with an Arduino Mega, a ramps board, and some stepper motor drivers. The Arduino Mega is kind of the brains. It's got this Atmega CPU on it that controls these input-output pins all along the edges. Our ramps board is going to plug in to these input-output pins along the edges and give us headers to plug all of our 3D printer components into. Our stepper motors, end stops, thermistors, all of these things we need to control the printer with the Arduino are going to plug into the ramps board here, and that ramps board with these male pins on the bottom is going to plug in to the Arduino. These kits also come with stepper motor drivers, which use these jumpers that you place across the bottom to set the micro stepping. If you're using the stock Dbot build, the drivers are called A4988. Make sure you put the potentiometer away from the power side of the ramps, orient it correctly, and place it over those three jumpers. So with that out of the way, let's look at some important things to take note of in the Dbot wiring diagram. The first thing to note is this little power input here. The 5 amps is jumped to that 11 amp terminal so that 5 amps can also come out of where that's labeled 11 amps. These Y and Z end stops that are on the back of the printer have their red and black wires combined so that only 4 leads are coming off, 2 for power and 2 for data from these back end stops. So just make note of that when you're building this wiring harness for these end stops. There's a 2-pin header that the wiring diagram shows here to plug in the electronics box cooling fan. It's not on all ramps boards. You might have to solder these 2 pins on yourself. When you're soldering the power to the heat bed, it can be kind of difficult because the wire is pretty thick and the aluminum acts as a huge heat sink for your soldering iron. So it's got a weight to melt the solder on there. You can use a heat gun to help you heat it up. So the glass bed is actually 314 millimeters by 214 millimeters with the edges nipped off. You can check back for that at E3D. You can see the wiring is just epoxy to the bottom and then comes down the drag chain into your relay or your MOSFET, whichever you have wired up there. So the CoreXY belt routing is actually fairly straightforward, even though it can seem kind of intimidating. You can see on both the right and the left there's a loop, and so on the right is the yellow loop that attaches at the front of the carriage and also at the rear, and the left does the same. So I'll just show you what I mean here. This belt is going to loop around, this side of the belt loops around and attaches to the face, the front of the hot end carriage. So you'll see it wraps around this pulley, around the back of it, and then it's going to get clamped with a good amount of tension, or a decent amount of tension, to the front of this carriage here. The other side of this belt is going to come all the way around the printer, through the back, and then touch the back of that carriage and just be tightly kind of secured around this pulley on this stepper motor shaft here. So I'm just going to thread this thing through behind this H-bar, all the way out the back of the printer, all the way around, and attach to the back of that hot end carriage here. So I'm just going to go through this whole thing and show you how that goes. Just a tip for these, once you do get them around and secured on there, make sure you have even tension between them. Even if you do have fairly even tension, you can pull the H-bar askew and you'll see that it's not parallel with the frame anymore. If that happens to you, you can just make sure you tighten on those H-bar ends by pushing that bottom wheel up into the bottom of the left or right side of the frame there, or both. Just getting a little bit more tension on your H-bar ends, and that should stop it from skewing. Moving the belt through some of these spaces was pretty tight, so I just used a little Allen key to help gently push it through. So you'll get these belts secured to the print carriage for the left and right motors. When you're securing them on, just a quick note, especially if you didn't use 100% infill, if you over tighten these little clamps in an effort to secure your belt here, you could crack the plastic, so just be careful about that. So we've got all our wiring harnesses plugged into the ramps board here. The ramps board is powered by the power supply, which has its connections crimped on with ring terminals. I'm not going to go over the details for the mains voltage, because it kind of will vary by your country and the type of power plug you have and all that stuff. And also the relay, or the MOSFET, which I use to the heated bed, because I kind of didn't follow the build guide there. I went with the MOSFET. But if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to try to help you out. So here I've got a test print going. To do the test print, you need to flash the board with Marlin, and that's what we'll go over in the next video. Flashing the board with Marlin, testing the printer out, and getting some basic G-code loaded up, and trying out a test print with your printer. So that's what I've got going on here, and that's hopefully where we'll get to in the next video. So if this video or the next video will be helpful for you, or you like this video, turn on notifications, subscribe, leave me a comment, a question, all that good stuff. I really appreciate you guys watching the videos. I hope they help. I hope you're enjoying them, and I hope to catch you tuned in for the next installment of the D-Bot build guide.